Right. Hey, Rhodes, how are you?
I am doing great. How are you doing, Jen?
I am doing well. I'm excited that we're here for your book launch. Before we get into all that goodness, just so folks know, my name is Jen T. Grace, and I'm the founder and CEO of Publisher Purpose. And folks are watching on some PYP channel of some kind. And your book's Rhodes launched on Tuesday. So 2/22 of 22.
Yeah.
Yes, so exciting. So, this to me is one of the best parts of the process where I get to have a conversation with you, the author, and just kind of get you to, talk about your work and your book and all of the goodness. Because we've been working on this for quite some time and we're here. And I would love to just kind of hear, like, even just high level, like what you do in the world before we dive into the specifics of your book.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me first and foremost. It's fun to connect with you and your audience. And a little bit about me. My name is Rhodes. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I run my own company called Rhodes Perry Consulting. And I help work with business leaders, inclusive leaders, those on the path, who are really interested in building more psychological safety, trust, and belonging, so that they can transform their workplace culture. And I widely consult and I love doing what I do and I like writing about it. And it's just fun to work with PYP to get my message out there. And really happy to be here.
Yeah. I would love to start with what the catalyst or driving force was behind this second book that you've written, and I will
Mhm.
ask you about the first book shortly thereafter.
Yeah, sure. And it kind of goes one and the same. So in the last chapter of my last book, Belonging at Work, I talked a lot about the importance of establishing a vision, a long-term vision of where you're going. And I had not just a few readers, a lot of readers say, "Hey, I really would love to know more about this idea of vision setting. I'm kind of struggling with how to do it outside of having a really strong diversity, equity, and inclusion statement." And so I was like, there's something to this. And then I was starting to look at research around some of the common failures for DEI commitments, goals, efforts, priorities, whatever you want to call them in an organization. And there's several. And one of the leading ones is the lack of a long-term vision, right? Like what is that kind of culture that you want to build that might not be taking place in your organization right now? And how do you even start with that? Because sometimes people don't know what could be better. They only know their current reality. They can only kind of name what the status quo is and why they don't like it. And so this book really kind of gives a framework to start by naming those things that you want to upend, right? So what about the status quo is causing harm maybe to you,
Mhm.
maybe to your colleagues, maybe to everybody in the organization? And then from there, it's almost like naming the negative space to kind of then articulate, right, what would be different if this wasn't in place, right? So,
Mhm.
and the book dives deep. We talk about traits of white supremacy culture. We talk about ableism, patriarchy, big
Mhm.
systems. It's deep. My hope is that it pushes those of us in the field as much as business leaders to really think about how these interlocking systems of dominance, as
Mhm.
bell hooks calls them, right, how they really harm us, even those of us who are at the highest levels of leadership.
Mhm.
And definitely for those of us who are leaders to really think about those furthest removed from our positions of power, how
Mhm.
then that might enhance the sting of exclusion.
Mhm.
And so the book is, I'm really proud of it.
Yeah.
It challenges people, right? And the biggest challenge is, how do we imagine this kind of belonging at work, and what could be possible if this was happening on a global scale? And so
Mhm.
that's big.
That is
um, yeah,
And
yeah,
you saying, "How do we imagine belonging at work?" is funny because it wraps both of your books all into one sentence.
yeah.
So, can you share, because you kind of, it sounds like this book is something that comes second after
Mhm,
someone has read your first book. So, let's go
mhm.
back in time to your first book, which came
Yeah,
out in November of 2018, which
yeah,
kind of seems wild that it was that many years ago, but
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know how we got here, but can you share a little bit about belonging at work so the listeners can get an understanding of that, and then we can kind of tie the two back together.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first book was really, so it was in 2018 when it came out, and it was trying at that time to make the case of why belonging, and one of our mutual friends, colleagues, Bernadette Smith, calls belonging in the workplace the holy grail, right? Like if that's our long-term vision and we want to feel this,
Yeah.
what the heck is it and why does it matter? And
Mhm.
then how do we start, no matter what our role is, how do we start shifting our behaviors and our beliefs to
Mhm.
really demonstrate traits of belonging?
Mhm.
And I think, like, just for those folks kind of watching, it's like, oh, that sounds really nice, but what about belonging can I kind of locate? Do I feel this in the workplace or not? And
Mhm.
so there's some really good research out there from CoQual, and they talked about in this really foundational report called The Power of Belonging, these 4 elements of belonging. So it's like you feel seen, so you're recognized and appreciated for who you are. You feel connected, so you have this kind of trust and rapport with your colleagues. And because of that, you feel supported. So people have your back. They're giving you what you need so you can do your best work. And then ideally, you're working in a workplace where you feel purpose and proud because your values are in alignment with those, with your organizations. And I think that that's really important because at the time that the book was written, there was conversation about belonging of like, yes, we want to build this in the workplace. And Pat Waders at LinkedIn, was foundational of like, DEI I get, on an abstract level, I need a feeling behind it, to really get committed. And when I think about this work, I think about the feeling of belonging and then also its absence. So like the sting of exclusion. And so that's all the things that we don't want to look at, like invisibility, disconnection, disengagement, shame. And I mean, I've definitely felt those things in the workplace,
Mhm.
and that sinks, even your feeling of showing up, being safe. Like if you don't feel safe showing up at work, then for whatever reason why you were hired, you have some genius, you have the talent, it's you're covering so much of the things that are precious to you that you can't even activate
Yeah.
those generative creative aspects of what you're bringing to the job. And we have
Mhm.
to change that. And so that's really what the first book was about.
Mm.
And I think it was helpful. It's nice to get feedback from readers where they're like, whoa, the way that you wrote this was was different, and I was able to connect with the content and the story as much as the research, and
Mhm.
trying to make the business case to my leaders to kind of understand why we should invest in
Yeah.
culture transformation work. Yeah.
So you had a full day of programming on launch day of February 22nd,
Yes.
and I appreciate your willingness to bring me in as part of that programming. But I stuck around for quite some time, and you had a specific speaker who was talking about how she now speaks to this larger, I don't want to say movement, but just the larger context of DEI as DEIB to include
Oh, yes.
belonging as well. And I thought that that was so great. And I'm curious, and this is probably written about in both of your books, but curious
Mhm,
for someone who's kind of watching this and they might know the term of just D&I, or they
mhm,
might know the DEI term, but and now you've brought it to me, in my opinion, to another level when we're talking about belonging. So where in your kind of journey of how you work with people did you recognize that belonging was really the thing that was missing? Because I feel like belonging
mhm.
is not the thing that's often led with when in DEI conversations.
Yeah, yeah, and thank you. I think with belonging, it's an emotional outcome, and the really cool thing just in those elements that I shared with you, we can measure those, and so we can assess for it too. And I think that that's really critical. And why it was missing is that I think where people start is, oh, we have to start with diversity. Well, I think by now, I think in most workplaces, and I'm out here in Portland, Oregon, even in Portland, Oregon, diversity is a given, right? Like it's just the nature of our workplaces.
Mhm.
Um, Inclusion is, are we intentionally including those in our workplaces who aren't a part of dominant culture, right? So if your leadership team is primarily composed of white, straight, cisgender men, and you're bringing in, let's just say you're bringing in a woman of color, what work is that leadership team doing to intentionally prepare themselves to be as good for the woman that they're bringing in as she's going to be for that leadership team to have new perspectives and ideas.
Mhm.
And the equity piece is both kind of at a personal level as well as kind of a systemic level. And just like at that personal level, it's on that piece of support, getting what you need so you can do your best work. And at a systemic level, it's looking at policies, practices, procedures that make it difficult for someone to get what they need if they're not a part of the dominant culture. So these are things, they're very abstract. And probably as I'm talking about them for some people in your audience, it's like, okay, I get this, I get this. Yet if we connect all of that work to our sense of either feeling belonging or feeling the sting of exclusion,
Mhm.
we don't need an assessment to know what we're feeling. Our feelings are real and right.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the piece that invites in people who might be the most resistant to doing this kind of culture change work. And so I think maybe why it was missing is that for so long, objectivity, right? To be rational and to leave all of the emotions out of the workplace was
Mhm.
probably why belonging was hard to talk about in the workplace, or more so why exclusion was difficult to talk about and the costs of it. And I
Mhm.
think like if we can get business leaders to recognize the cost of not having this in place,
Mhm.
then then I think making that upfront investment for kind of the long-term benefits makes more sense.
Mhm.
And it takes a while to get to discuss, getting people to recognize that. And so that first book was really foundational to help people recognize that we have to think of the outcome, that long-term emotional outcome. And I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely did, you definitely did. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in your book there's 4 pieces in terms of, kind of actually, I don't wanna phrase it wrong. I was gonna say, like, kind of how DEI is failing or the failure to DEI. Can we kind of talk about that? I just wanna make sure
Oh
that
yeah.
I'm phrasing it properly, and I feel like I already did it.
Yeah, no, you said it right. Yeah, so typically, and this is what the research is bearing right now, there's 4 common pitfalls
Mm,
for why DEI efforts, I'm just gonna say that, why they
mhm,
fail.
mhm,
In most organizations, there's the lack of that long-term vision. So
mhm,
what is it for, right? So we're gonna train everybody. Why? What's that
mhm,
long-term outcome? And what else needs to happen if you're training people around different behaviors or beliefs? What systems are you setting up in place so that they can continue doing that, to making that kind of transformation? So lack of a long-term vision. The second piece is unaccountable and unequipped leaders to model these
mm,
kind of behaviors that are different from the status quo. So inclusive leadership behaviors might be something that your audience is familiar with and hearing. And not enough organizations are equipping leaders with skills, not necessarily knowledge, right? We don't have to know all of the ins and outs about the historical harms of the workplace.
mhm,
What we do need as leaders is when we encounter a harm that arises, we feel confident that we can begin creating the space to repair, so
mhm,
that it's going to build stronger relationships and slowly repair trust, and that
yeah,
takes time. A couple of other failures are, you have this great vision and say you have equipped leaders, yet you're not cascading all of the change that you want across the organization. So oftentimes this work lives in HR, right? And HR is a really critical component. Yet if I know you have a marketing background. If you're not working with your marketing team, or you're
mhm,
not working with your leadership team or product design, the work is not going to succeed.
mhm,
And then the last piece, and I think this one is something that everybody in your audience can probably connect with, is just that absence of real representation in leadership positions that either reflect your experiences and who you are, or the
mhm,
communities that you're serving. And so those are the 4 failures, and the book itself is broken up into 4 parts to try
mhm,
to resolve those challenges. So we
mm,
talk about culture, kind of status quo culture and the ideal culture that we want, and then the commitment that you can make to start that transformation. We also look at leadership, team building, and then how we structure our work,
mm,
from a hierarchy to looking at more flatter models to
mhm,
build more equity in our system. So again, it goes deep, and it goes, from your own experiences to the organization that you work in.
mhm.
And my hope is that it opens up new possibilities, and it challenges the reader to really think about what might be available to them. And first and foremost, just giving themselves permission to believe that they can make this kind of transformation, because we can, but we have to start with our belief and just doing the work to get
Yeah.
there.
So much. Like, there's just so much. And so, what is your, or maybe who? We'll start with the who. Who
Mhm.
is the ideal person to pick this book up and take some kind of action? Like, who is it, and like, what action are you hoping that they take?
Yeah, yeah. My ideal person, and I think of the leadership teams that I work with. So those folks that hold some level of positional power and influence, right? So different from belonging at work. So if you're passionate about this work and you want to do kind of those everyday actions, I think belonging at work is kind of a universal text. And it's even in the subtitle for Imagine Belonging. It is your inclusive leadership guide to building an equitable organization. So it's leaders that are on the path. I work with inclusive leaders. I work with leaders that are trying to get equipped to become more inclusive in their practices. That's who I'm targeting with this book.
Mhm.
And it could be anyone from a startup or a small business entrepreneur to, it could be a CEO of a major corporation. I really want leaders to really think about what kind of implicit culture is in place and to name that, and then ask themselves, is this in the best service of the workforce that we have here, and also the people that we're trying to deliver products, services, on and on and on, like our ideal customers, I guess. Is the culture serving them as well? And then if it's not, this book can actually start to offer some solutions to make that kind of transformation. And I talk about the difference between change and transformation. So
Mhm.
if we don't like the status quo, we don't just want to change. It's not change management. Do you know what I mean? It's because a change implies that it's reversible, right? So like
Yeah.
I can change my mind about something. I could always
Yeah.
change my mind back. I could change my eating habits and I can always go back to what they once were.
Mm.
Whereas like a transformation is, and we see this in nature, the caterpillar becomes the butterfly, an element spontaneously combusts and it becomes something new.
Mm.
And even for ourselves, our bodies change every 7 years. So who we are right now, just go back to the pictures of you as a newborn. That's a pretty radical transformation.
Yeah.
And that's what we want, because we don't want to return to the status quo. And I think that we have a once in a generation opportunity, that we're in this pandemic with so much uncertainty, and coming out of it. I would, it'd be interesting to survey everyone in your audience right now.
Mm.
Do you want to go back to the way work used to be? And if not,
Yeah.
what do you want work to be? And that's our opportunity. And I
Mhm.
hope that when people pick up that book and the ideal reader reads it, it's like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm going to choose to lead, and I'm
Yeah.
going to choose to do something different than what I did in the past, because now I know better, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
I love that comparison between change and transformation. That's such a simple way of looking at it, but a really profound and deep way of looking at it as well. Because it
Thank
seems
you.
kind of so obvious when you say it, but I don't think that that's how people see things. So that's
Mhm.
really interesting. And so, is it safe to assume that someone in a workplace, regardless of the workplace's size, could pick this book up and potentially, maybe they don't have any individual influence, or maybe they're not in a leadership role, or any number of things, but is this something that they could then pass along to someone within their organization who might have that influence? Do you think that, is it kind of well positioned to just be that, maybe it's the bridge, right, from like someone who's experiencing that lack of belonging at a lower rung in an organization, to that person who might have some influence over it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I would even say for people that are furthest removed from, positions of power wherever you work, that the book absolutely offers something for you as well. In particular, just as we talk about in the first part of the book, what culture is,
Mhm.
right? It's that transferable set of beliefs and behaviors that allow a group to survive, ideally thrive. So kind of just thinking about what are those beliefs and behaviors that are a part of our culture. And right there, no matter what your role is, you can choose some of the belonging culture beliefs that are outlined in this book, to
Mhm.
start adopting those and just having that direct impact on the immediate people that you work with. So that's one thing that's available to anybody who reads the book. And the second piece is just as we think about what it means to be a leader, right? You don't necessarily need positional power to be a leader. And
Mhm.
so there's some really great content in that of naming the cost of what happens when we are forced to fit in, right? We have to
Mhm.
assimilate to the dominant culture and how brutal that can feel for us to extract the things that are most precious. And then what could be the difference, right? How do we do things differently and really recognize, just like our lives, right? Like we can be the artists of the way that we show up at work, the way that we lead. And again, you don't have to have positional power to inspire your colleagues, right?
Yeah.
And that would be my definition of leadership. Like if you have an impact on just one other person in your immediate team, you're a
Mhm.
leader. You're showing a different way than maybe the way things have always been done or the way that things used to be done, right?
Yeah.
So, and yeah, and then you go deeper in the book, especially the last part, talking about workplace structure. You know, it will take probably an executive team to really rethink, do we need this extreme level of hierarchy? And
Mm.
what's the cost of keeping that when it's so exclusionary, right? In terms of power and decision making, the more we can kind of localize that, and I know you and I know this really well, right? Like the more that leaders can delegate, so they can sit in the visionary place that they ought to be
Mhm.
in, and they're trusting those folks that they hire with the knowledge and expertise that they bring in to make decisions at the local level on marketing or your latest software product or whatever. Go do that. I don't want to make, that's
Yeah.
that's not my area of expertise. That's why you smart people are all around me to help us
Yeah.
thrive. So yeah, like I think like that section at least could give any reader an idea of what could be possible, especially, like people are on their way to leading in all sorts of different ways. So if you're someone who's reading this book and you might be working in a large organization and you're thinking about, maybe someday I'll start my own business,
Mhm.
this is a good read to kind of to flip through to think about how would I structure my business differently,
Yeah.
based on experiences that I've had in the past that weren't so great and didn't really make sense,
Mm.
right? So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot. It's a basic mess. It's a universal message of
Mhm.
imagination, and then there's lots of different areas that we're challenged to imagine. And
Yeah. Which is
yeah,
why the title is so great, Imagine Belonging. It's just so, it's innovative and creative in just the titling of it alone. And
absolutely.
so one of my kind of last questions, and of course, if I have not asked you anything you want to talk about, by all means, but
Yeah.
I'm curious that if we both just kind of waved a magic wand right now, and 6 months from now, you are someone's reaching out to you, and of course, it's going to happen well before 6 months, but 6 months from now,
Yeah.
what is something that what is your hope that the impact of someone reading this book is? Like, what are they saying to you?
One, that they really gave themselves permission to imagine something different from the status quo. I think if people just do that, it's like, yes, it's working
Mm.
because then you're freeing yourself like literally from stress hormones of cortisol, right? That kind of keep us limited and really don't allow us to open up to possibilities that could transform, right? That could really transform. And when we're in that generative space, that's where creativity and innovation comes from. That's where we're more likely to be vulnerable, to make real connections, and that's to me like the secret sauce of running a business really well.
Mhm.
Um, I think another thing that kind of reflecting back that would be really validating is that people are actually unraveling beliefs and behaviors about their culture, right? And there's a section that goes deep into featuring the work of Temo Kun and Kenneth Jones around traits of white supremacy culture. So these are beliefs and behaviors we have to constantly, US context, just we no matter who we are, they're internalized about, our thoughts about what professionalism is. And the book contrasts belonging culture traits. So there's 14 belonging culture traits that I write about. How do we embed those? How do we give people the skill sets to begin practicing these new kind of beliefs and behaviors? Not to change anyone, right? But if people are on board to say, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. I want to think about the transferable set of beliefs and behaviors that will allow our organization to thrive. These things that are just implicit that we haven't even questioned or interrogated. I'm now ready to interrogate them and think about how we can reward people
Yeah.
for embracing these belonging behaviors. And we're not only going to reward, but we're gonna assess, right, new talent, right, and asking interview questions that demonstrate, hey, tell us about a time when you had to embrace adaptability, right? Like that's
Mm,
one of the traits. I think that's really key,
yeah.
as we're living through really times of uncertainty, right? And so there's 13 other traits like that that's my hope, is that
Mm,
people start to operationalize what's offered in the book,
mm,
and in creative ways. Just like in the last book, it was really interesting to see how people took the concepts of the book and
mhm.
then made it come to life.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited to see the interpretations, right? It's almost
Mhm.
like a piece of art where it's
Yeah.
like, wow, I wrote this thing and you just took it to a whole other level. Thank you.
Yeah.
You know?
That's
Yeah.
the beautiful thing about books too, is when you have something that you're, especially with nonfiction books, where you want your reader to experience something or to gain something or to do something, we can only go so far as the author to kind of just lay the information out there, but they're the ones that actually have to pick up that torch and run with it. And so
Mhm.
it is interesting from the author perspective, where they are coming back and saying like, hey, you said this, but I did this instead, or I did this in addition to. And that is so powerful, because then it can help you shift and adapt and transform other offerings that you might have to
Yes.
further help those organizations and those people to, be better and do better, and in this case to just feel that sense of belonging, which is so
Yes.
powerful.
Yes.
Mm.
100%.
Oh,
100%. Yeah.
good. So, what to kind of round us out here? What are the other ways that people can engage with you? Because you have a whole ecosystem of belonging going on. So it is not just a book. You have a lot going on. So, can you just kind of share a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So one, if people do want to get the book, imaginebelonging.com is the place to go. If you are on the path of becoming an inclusive leader, if you're a DEI professional, if you're someone who's interested in this field, we have a belonging membership community. We meet 2 times a month, and it's really accessible. So what's great about it is we practice the art of community care, right? So it's if any of us are feeling compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress from doing this work, perhaps burnout, right? Like this is a space where it's very giving, it's very generous. And
Yeah.
so chances are, if there's some really prickly challenge that you're working on, and it's like, no one's going to understand this, bring it to this space. This
Mhm.
is a space where we workshop, and we also, there's lots of other DEI pros in the space who offer like, hey, you know what, Rhodes, I've been here before. Here's some things to consider. If you would like, number one, it's always about consent. Would you like some guidance? Would you like some advice? If you're ready for it, it's there. And then we also bring in guest speakers, so DEI pros from global pros. We've even had folks from South Africa. Nini Molefe has joined us a couple of times. She's awesome. And we learn. So there's different topics. And in this month, we're talking about ways that we as DEI professionals can upend anti-Blackness in our own practice and why that matters, and then extending that to the workplace,
Mhm.
right? And next month, we're talking about modern families. So we have Tristan Reese coming in, who is amazing and does a lot of work in businesses to help businesses prepare for supporting LGBTQ families, and some of the nuances that I think that even for DEI pros, I think there's going to be a lot of learning that happens next month. So that's one thing. And the other that's really accessible and free is our Belonging at Work Summit. It happens every July, and we bring in about 24 DEI social justice thought leaders, and it's enormous. So it's this like, me, I did a
Mhm.
6 hour live stream 2 days ago. So I like giving, and I like pouring into people who show up, because there's so much to this work. And we started that summit primarily because, prior to COVID, to go to these kind of DEI conferences, it's an extraordinary experience, and yet, very few people have the professional budget to travel and to take the
Mhm.
time off to do it. And we know that this work, it takes all of us to really transform our workplaces. And so the summit is, you show up for the live event, it's 100% free, and your mind will, if you're ready for it, it will be blown in a really nice way. So those are a couple of things. And of course, if people are interested in working, with me, rhodesperry.com is the best place to find out all of the consulting services that we offer over here.
Perfect.
So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, your summit is incredible, and all of the things that you do is incredible. And I love that we share that value system of giving. So, like at PYP, I also do a whole host of things that are 100% free because it's just a matter of getting access to that information to a wider audience. And as you know, some people work with you and others won't, and that's perfectly fine. But at least we're getting that broader message of whatever it is that they need: accessibility, inclusion, belonging, all of those things. So,
Yeah.
which is why we have been working together for so long, I think.
Yes. Yes. And someone on your team had said, I hope that you write 10 more books with us. And I was like, okay, if I have more things to say, I will. I think I'm going to
Yeah.
take a break for a little bit though.
Yeah, it's probably a good idea. So we have November 2018, February 2022. We'll have to figure out how many months in between and then plot for your trilogy to be
Yes.
complete at that point.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, we'll definitely do it. I'm going to need like a long, long break, and rest is super important for all
Yeah.
of us. So
Yeah, absolutely. You've had a
yeah.
very busy week for sure.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me here today. And it
Yeah, of
was really great
course.
to connect, and to connect with everyone in your audience as well.
Yeah, I
So
appreciate you. I appreciate you being here. And then, so as Rhodes mentioned, you can go to rhodesperry.com. You can also go to anywhere that you would like to purchase a book, and you can get the book there. So please do. And if you do go ahead and purchase the book, please leave a review on Amazon. That would be absolutely fantastic. Is one of the things that, as authors, myself included, we struggle the most with, is that just getting people to leave reviews. It is a one-to-one type of effort. So if you read it, you like it, leave a review. That would be fantastic. That is my call to action. So
thank you. Yes.
very good. All right. Thanks, Rhodes. I appreciate you being here, and I will talk to you